income community. I just received the message here. Sorry. I don't have a presentation because the things I imagined that I could talk about today are still going on. As you can see, we will be able to see from Thiago's presentation in a specific point that we acted together here, and I'm happy to have his work here presented along with mine, because it certainly will be touching each other. But what I would like to start with is about how I perceive basic income history in Brazil. Besides the most well-known internationally fact that we have a national law to institute the basic income that was a result of Eduardo Suplicy's work during his terms in the Senate of Brazil. It actually is kind of a culminating point from a long process that started not with the basic income itself, but with a negative income tax proposal that he has made in 1991. That was a period in Brazil's history in which we were consolidating aspects of our constitution that had been approved in 1988. So after the constitution, although it's referred as a social constitution in terms of definitions of a set of policies, like, for example, universal health coverage. We were in a very open environment to institutional innovation in terms of how things that were discussed during the constitutional process would be implemented. And Suplicy presented in this specific period his proposal for a negative income tax as a minimum income schemes that could effectively act to extinguish poverty in Brazil in 1991. This had an impact in Brazil, especially in the public debate, that was very aligned to the original proposal of a negative income tax that is usually discussed since the contribution of Milton Friedman, and that was kind of a distant movement from the traditional leftist acting way in Brazil during that time. There was some kind of attempt to distinguish what this social progressive people in Brazil was proposing during that time from the liberals, from the neoliberals, and this proposal kind of had a negative impact in this coalition, in this broader coalition involving leftist and social progressive people. And although it was well received in the public debate, it didn't succeed in the National Congress, but the debates that were generated from this point on were very important to unfold a lot of policies in Brazil. Like, for example, from 1993 on, a minimum income schemes based on this proposal, but at a local level. So states and municipalities started their local programs inspired by what they were declaring to be an inspiration from Suplicy's negative income tax program that was referred in Brazil actually as a minimum income scheme, not as a negative income tax. And thereon, we had this consolidation process from the constitutional amendments. And there was a very important step during this process that was the elderly, the poor elderly pensions that was instituted in 1996 called BPC, Benefício de Prestação Continuada, and that is certainly a minimum income schemes for the elderly that can't reach the minimum contributions regulations for pensions. And although Bolsa Familia is a widely known program for cash transfers discussions, BPC, these elderly people minimum income schemes, has an impact that is as large as Bolsa Familia in terms of poverty, a little less in terms of coverage, but is certainly something that is part of our environment in Brazil when discussing cash transfers. At the same time, those states and municipalities that were creating their programs, they actually were diffused for the national level that started to co-finance those programs and stimulate a number of municipalities and other states to implement the same programs. But I think there is a fact that is very poorly discussed in Brazil, that is the role of Suplicy during this period, besides those that are well known for his law, for the 2004 law. But in 1998, Suplicy presented also two important projects, two important bills of laws in the Senate that are still having an impact on the basic income debate. The first was a bill of law to Brazil to institute an official poverty line that could work as a reference for national statistics and also for these cash transfers programs. These had debates during more than 20 years for now, and they are still having an impact since the COVID crisis really focused on poverty situation and how the cash transfers that are currently being paid cannot reach a meaningful value that can be referred to as poverty alleviation or elimination. So that was an important project from 1998 that was followed by another bill of law to create a fund like the Alaska Permanent Fund that could pay a minimum income scheme benefit for the poorest using the participation of the federal government in a number of economy businesses or real estate, or even, for example, profits that they have from the public companies like our oil company. Those are being also recovered in public debate now, since we do have a very liberal government now that is proposing a lot of what they call disestatization process, which is selling the national companies. I'm not talking about whether it's good or not, but they were certainly part of this debate about the fund and what to do with the money after selling companies like the oil company, what is being debated now. And then we do have only in 2001, the bill of law for the citizens' basic income presented by Suplicy. Before Lula's government took place in 2003. But in 2003, the Bolsa Familia program started with an executive order that was a temporary measure that had to be approved by the National Congress. So during the debate of the confirmation of this executive order, which is something that is necessarily done in 60 to 120 days after the executive order is placed, a number of other issues took space in National Congress, and the 2001 bill to introduce the basic income was recovered, and Suplicy managed to approve this along with the Bolsa Familia law. So we once the Bolsa Familia was converted into law, it got the number 10,836, and the Citizens Basic Income Law is the law 10,835. So they are followed one for the other, and they are both from 2004. And from then on, we do have a discussion that is Bolsa Familia a step towards the implementation of the basic income law or not? So this discussion took place many times in the specialized community of cash transfers, in the political community, and also in the public debate. But it is, of course, always hard to discuss cash transfers in public in a conservative environment, how it was approached, especially by the media during the Bolsa Familia consolidation years. But as we can identify here in Brazil, there are internal logical functions in Bolsa Familia that would allow us to affirm that it could be understood as a first step towards the implementation of the basic income law. Those mostly are the continuous enrollment of new beneficiaries. So the program started with 300 million families in 2003, 2004, and now it has 14 million families, almost a quarter of the population of Brazil. So once we have discussions like the Finland experiment, the California stuff that is going on, even the Ontario basic income pilot, we do see discussions that for our understand are not meaningful for example, whether it's going to be universal or not, whether it's covering more people or not during time. And Bolsa Familia permanently introduced, enrolled more and more families, which allowed us to say that it eventually would cover the entire population of Brazil. This specific logical instrument or understand was broken since the Workers' Party left the government in 2016. After that, there were a lot of fluctuation in terms of coverage, in terms of number of families being reached by Bolsa Familia program, but also agenda, as in the public policy field discussions occur, is an opportunity for us to state that Bolsa Familia could eventually turn into a basic income program. And this is part of the permanent agenda now that we have the future of cash transfers in Brazil being discussed in a daily basis. And then it kind of stayed like that for more than 15 years. The Bolsa Familia had these logical logical instruments that or logical understandings that allowed us to affirm that this is a step towards basic income, but it stuck like that for 15 years. And the pandemic has a special impact on that because of how we had to expand cash transfers during the pandemic towards what, again, lifted the expectations about universal coverage. And now we are really trying to take advantage of this through from an incrementalist point of view, reform Bolsa Familia towards maintaining or sustaining this more universal coverage. After I see you, Timothy, I think I had my time, right? But at the same time that the pandemic took place, it also took place an important judgment in the Brazilian Supreme Court that is the object of Thiago is going to tell us about. So I think I'm done here. Just would like to tell you that this is taking place every day because Jair Bolsonaro has emitted has edited a new executive order that has to be approved again in the National Congress, but to change Bolsa Familia and eventually introduce more conditionalities, which are, from our understand, is a regressive thing from the basic income point of view. But we are struggling to change this as much as we can to avoid these regressive change in Bolsa Familia program. Thank you.
Thank you, Leandro. So up next, we're gonna hear from Wilson Giovanni Jimenez Barbosa, and I'm going to play a video for his presentation.
This presentation shows the principal results of the research named Universal Basic Income Social Perception Among People in Colombia, a Grandeur Theory. The authors are Wilson Giovanni Jimenez Barbosa and Joana Zaret Acuña Gómez. The research was funded by Jorge Tadeo Lozano University. This is the agenda. First, why give a UBI to the Colombian people? Second, research problem and methodology. Third, open and actual categories. Fourth, grounded theory. 5. Conclusion. This research began to do in 2017. In those times, to talk about UBI in Colombia was considered a utopia. The Colombian academic groups had known about previous experience and theoretical discussions given in other parts of the world, like Canada, Finland, USA, in a specific Alaska state, about UBI, but there was not a similar experience in Colombia. Maybe the closer case was the conditional cash transfers given by the Colombian government to the poorest inhabitants of the country since 2000, but this is not a UBI. Nevertheless, the experience with conditional cash transfers has created different kind of social perceptions in Colombian people which could affect the possibility to implement a UBI in Colombia. But why give a UBI to the Colombian people? Basically, because the country has had a conflictive history. Violence, inequity, poverty, social injustice are the variables to characterize the context in that millions of people live day by day. The objective of this research was to acknowledge social perception among Colombian people regarding the reception of a UBI, as a research innovation that helps policymakers to decide if the implementation of this policy is ideal according to its social, cultural, and political acceptance. This research was developed through a qualitative method of grounded theory type. The instrument for data collection was in-depth interview applied to 37 people from different social status, country regions, and ethnicities. The interviews were done in different Colombian cities such as Riohacha, Santa Marta, Valledupar, Bogotá, Pasto, and Tumaco. The summary of the categories building process is illustrated in the following tables. As a result of analyzing process, firstly, 26 open categories were identified. Secondly, open categories were grouped in 11 actual categories according to the logical connection among them. Finally, actual categories were gathered in 4 selective categories that worked as the foundation of the grounded theory resulting from this research exercise. In this graphic, you can view a model of the research analytic process. Grounded theory. Inquiring people in Colombia about UBI led to a discussion concerning to the essence of what it means to be Colombian, which implied listening to their dreams and hopes as well as fears and even hate feelings. First category, distrust in the other. The first perception that emerged was the one related to the importance that work has within Colombian society values. What does not come from work is labeled as immoral and generate distrust. Even those who obtain their incomes not derived from work are hardly criticized. Work is considered an obligation, a need for survival, to make dreams come true, to provide family, to grow as a human being, and to contribute to society. Those who do not work are assumed as a pariah. Continuing with working, it results interest in the relationship interviews established between UBI as source of relief when it comes to economy, but also a possible disincentive to work. This serenity regarding economy is perceived as concerning for those who have companies because they think it would be difficult for them to find employees. Maybe the fear expressed by employers reflect the improvement that UBI would represent for potential employees' salary, allowing them to avoid accepting jobs that do not grant labor and economic dignity. Another perception emerging from suggesting UBI grant is the duality between what one would do with it and what the others would do. In a sense, it showed people distrust in the others. Those who were interviewed frequently expressed that they would invest it wisely if they receive it, while the others would do it deficiently. Some of them even expressed that the others did not really need it. Beyond the perspective of how the people who would get a UBI could use it, there is an underlying moral judgment on the other's freedom and the possibility that each person must decide what to do or not with an UBI. That moral judgments create perception for which UBI validity depends exclusively on the virtuous use of the income, understood as the payback that could be obtained from spending it on education or economical projects. These judgments create a speech which is opposed to UBI principles, when it is assumed that this kind of initiative can lead to a social step back by producing what has been called mean castration. That means reducing creativity in which social support networks have been based on the economic of survival imperative through the Colombian history. For this reason, communities think it's unfair to get economic benefits only for being citizens of a nation. That means they do not agree with the conditionality principle of UBI because they understand it's a policy with negative outcomes that would eventually lead to a bigger social crisis, a statement no less than ironic if it is considered that Colombia has great rates of poverty and inequality. As corollary of this section, distrust in the other is so strong in Colombian society that an interviewed person who was asked about UBI categorically replied, "It would turn people into mediocre." Therefore, thinking about a UBI in Colombia must include strategies and actions aimed to exceed the main sources of distrust, a very difficult task that need the previous construction of a new relationship between state and citizens. Second category, hope for a better society. In contrast, most of the people recognize this income as a benefit that would bring the possibility of having a better life. This is how an antagonistic speech is built out of distrust and fear. Therefore, hopes for a life with less privations appear, as well as recognitions of other suffering of those who had no food, who face the hardest poverty daily. That is to say that UBI allows people to improve their life quality, and not only understood from an individual subjective perspective, but also from collective perspective, from the construction of a democratic and participative society, one based on empathy and respect for the other, for nature and life itself. In respect to informal work on the streets, interviewed people consider that UBI has potential for improving life condition of those who struggle to subsist daily because they would have an income to make their contributions to social security system and they would not have the need of working under unfair conditions. In respect of robbery and crime invading the streets day to day, interviewees believe that UBI would decline this phenomena by generating a new subsistence way that would dispel the need of committing crime for surviving. Moreover, said benefits are not only expected within the neighborhoods, communities, but also for family welfare, giving some sense of peace to those working mothers worrying because they must leave their children under the care of third parties, because UBI could fund that kind of protection that currently, because of state failure, is absent. Likewise, it is considered that UBI could be spent in financing education and that way improving competitiveness and the country's economy with a positive impact on families' lives. Since it's not a subsidy, UBI have the potential of ending the dependency established between state and beneficiary. In other words, it would not have the risk of leading to clientelism, stigmatization, and bureaucracy that in some cases are associated with conditional cash transfers policies. Other discussions take place about the fairness of giving a UBI to people with high incomes because that decision would need the creation of a tributary system or the modification of the existing to compensate the distributive injustice originated by giving the wealthy people more money than they already have. Freedom is another aspect perceived as related among the interviewed people. They think getting the support of UBI would allow them to enjoy more activities related to family life, entertainment, undertaking personal dreams without that implying to spend the money they need for basic needs. They even spoke out about investing UBI money for altruism and giving help to those in most need. In summary, UBI is perceived as a potential way to transform the structures of the society, state, and individuals, what would imply a huge challenge, being necessary the creation of complementary policies and state accompaniment to the citizens in order to help them developing their potentials. Third category, to be unconditional. The unconditional support inherent to UBI generates several moral judgments expressed through perception varying from whole acceptance to a perspective of rights and duties that must be assumed to become beneficiary. The conditionings that beneficiaries would need to compel include education and work. This latter element emerged, as it was pointed previously, as one of the strongest moral judgments that shape and define the possibility of implementing UBI. Likewise, it's obvious that from interviewees' perspective work is a way of dignifying human beings, of avoiding social exclusion, and that is the reason why they see UBI as a complement of other incomes but never as a substitute for work. There are perspectives that point working as a joy, a pleasure, and for those reasons people will not stop doing it. In addition, UBI would bring deliverance to the work remuneration binomial, allowing people to do it for passion and not for money. Fourth category, to be implemented. The decision of implementing UBI in Colombia originates plenty of questionings because there would be a radical change surrounding it. For example, the political approach of UBI is presumed by most of the interviewed people to come from socialism, in the face of which there is a strong resistance considering the predominance of open market model in the country. As it was previously mentioned, the resistance to implementing UBI is based on the alleged transformation into parasites that individuals undergo due to socialism and or communism, making them to become completely dependent on the state without giving a reward. That is one of the strongest moral judgments surrounding UBI, and the reason why people would resist its implementation. Other perspective or reaction in the path of UBI implementation has its basis on assuming it as an ideal but an utopic situations. On the contrary, some people perceive UBI as a way of settling the historic social debt that Colombian state has with its citizens. From said perspective, UBI might be understood as a path to welfare and a stranger's commitment from the state in relation to granting the support coming from this income. Finally, the decision of implementing UBI must go through an examination of its impacts over fiscal and estimated aspects and the productivity of the country. Conclusion: if UBI would be implemented in Colombia, its development must be accompanied by policies aimed to transform citizens' fears of getting state support, evolving into a more aware society in which solidarity and equity are priorities. Also, in which there is an understanding of how UBI constitutes a right to views, justice and social welfare, since quite necessary in a changing and unequal climate such as the one Colombia has nowadays. Thanks so much for listening to me.
Okay, it seems like Timothy is not around, so I suppose I should go then next. I'm gonna play my video a little bit faster so we can gain some time. Please let me know.
Sorry,
Okay.
I got stuck on
Okay.
YouTube there or something. I think my computer was having a meltdown. If you want to play your video, then go ahead, or I can play it if you want.
Timothy, I'm gonna play it a little bit faster so we can gain some time, and I have checked and it doesn't really affect.
Okay, perfect. I'll let you do that then.
Can you already see my screen?
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So, hi everyone, my name is Armando Escobar. I'm here in Colombia. I've had the privilege of doing this research, which was sponsored by international cooperation from a solicitation that the Colombian government did. So I hope you enjoy it.
Sorry, Armando, we don't have sound on there.
You don't have sound?
No. So maybe what you need to do is if you stop the screen share and then when you start it again, you'll see a little tick box in the bottom left of the, where you choose which window you're going to share that says share computer sound, I think.
Okay.
So if you stop this screen share now.
No, I don't. No. Okay, good. Okay. You see, I don't see it.
Is it the option to stop the screen share that you can't find?
Okay, here it is. Here it goes. I'm gonna start all over.
Yeah. Great.
Hi everyone, welcome to this session about some recommendations to the implementation of UBI in Colombia, and particularly about its impact on poverty and inequality. I have recently published this book on the topic from a broader perspective. The book is in Spanish, but if some of you wants to read it, go to the webpage governance.co to check it out. The basic idea that I want to explore in this presentation and in the paper is that UBI should be a point of arrival for Colombia's social protection system, for any country's social protection system for that matter. Let me get a little poetic about it. I think UBI could be the third greatest social revolution in recent centuries. For me, the other two were the abolition of slavery in the Americas and the transformation of the role of women during the 20th century. However, for me, the implementation of UBI should resemble more the women's emancipation than the slavery abolition. Let me explain why I think like that. In order to abolish slavery, and this is mostly true for North America, a decision of constitutional nature had to be made. This decision in the hands of politicians meant chaos and war. Let's suppose we would have done the same thing with women. Let's imagine our societies in the early 1900s, and let's imagine bringing a proposal before our parliaments to give women the role, rights, and benefits that they have today. I am positive that this would have meant chaos and very little possibility of agreement. But fortunately, women's emancipation took a different road. Several very different steps were made throughout the 20th century to achieve what we have today. I think there's enough evidence out there to back by women. When Richard Nixon, a very conservative president, proposed in the late 60s the implementation of the Families Assistance Programs, a majority Democrat Congress did not approve it. On the other hand, prior to June 5th of 2016, polls showed that the majority of Swiss were in favor of a UBI. However, 70% voted against the UBI that day on the referendum. Implementing UBI at one strike is almost impossible and very risky. That is why I propose its implementation in several phases, as many as a country needs to transform what they already have as protection into a UBI-like program. Let me clarify a couple of things before moving on. I propose, as point of arrival, a UBI that works like a negative income tax. That is, that beneath certain income threshold, beneficiaries receive money, and above it, they pay taxes. The other thing is that during the transition from what we have to the full UBI, we will need to do means testing to select the beneficiaries. This means that the key characteristic of universality will only be met at the end, at the point of arrival. In the case of Colombia, I have identified 13 programs that can be replaced and transformed into UBI. I have classified these programs in 4 groups, depending on their degree of replacement with a UBI. These are very high, high, medium, and low. The elements behind these categories are basically how much they share with UBI, their goals and characteristics. In the very high group are, for instance, programs that are almost like UBI. This is, they are periodic cash transfer. Some of them are conditional, some aren't. They are all targeted to the poor. In this group, I have also classified the Earned Income Tax Credit, whose economic conception is at the core of UBI, but its functioning is very different. In the high category, we find unconditional and periodic cash transfers, but their beneficiaries are not necessarily poor, which brings a completely new discussion on the table. Once again, in this group, I have also classified pensions whose economic conception is also close to the UBI, and actually they function very alike. The medium group are subsidies related to housing. One is a cash-like transfer, the other is a discount in the utilities bill. I've left for the low category programs that share some DNA with UBI, but merging them may become trickier. The table summarizes the subsidies under consideration. Figures in the description are in Colombian pesos, and for simplicity, let's assume that $1 is about 4,000 pesos. Let's start with the very high programs. We find there Solidarity Income, created as a response for COVID, and gives 160,000 pesos for family per month. Annually, it provides 1.9 million pesos, which are about $480. We also have Elder Colombia with a monthly subsidy of 80,000, Families in Action that incentivizes children's attendance to school and medical checkups, Youth in Action and Access that help university students, the very particular VAT compensation, which at the end is just an extra monthly payment of 75,000 pesos for Families in Action and Elder Colombia. Finally, on the very high replacement group, we find the Earned Income Tax Credit. To estimate its value, I consider the exemption of 25% for wage earners and the first 39 million income exemption. To make the analysis more meaningful, I compare these tax benefits with the 6% withholding tax liability for general services to non-filers. The high replacement programs are the cash allowance from the family subsidy system that provides workers' dependents with about 36,000 pesos, around $100 a year. In this category, I dive into the very complex scenario of pensions through the mean benefit Social Security. Under this scheme, beneficiaries are recognized with a pension until death, regardless of how much they contributed. For estimating the subsidy implied in this program, I use the following parameters: a minimum wage of 900,526 pesos, a pension of 13 monthly payments, an average survival of pensioners of 18 years, according to the current life expectancy of the country of 77 years. These parameters yield a cost per person at a present value of 207 million. With the same minimum wage and contributions equivalent to 16% for 300 months, the total contribution of a retiree amounts to 44 million. This means that the system covers the difference of 163 million per pensioner, 9 million per year, about $2,200. For the highly replaceable programs, we have the periodic economic benefits, which covers those who are not eligible for the regular pension. The subsidy is also the product of the difference between the savings of the beneficiary and the benefits, and the amount to $300 per year. The group that I consider with medium level of replacement is basically comprised of the utilities subsidies, which yearly amount to $50 for water and sanitation, $49 for electricity, and $22 for natural gas. Finally, at the low end of replacement, I propose the housing subsidy, which gives around 26.3 million pesos to each beneficiary, and the school feeding program, which are food rations that cost around $200 a year for each kid. After having identified these programs, let me now share how much the government spends on them under the current conditions and budgets. This estimate allows us to have some sort of budget baseline that determines the starting point of resources that the transition to a UBI would have. This new table presents the summary of these items. This means that, excluding the earned income tax credit, the country's current budget for subsidies, which have a very high replacement with UBI, amounts to 8.1 trillion pesos, roughly $2 billion. Let me clarify a couple of these figures. The cost of the mean benefit system is estimated considering that 81% of its beneficiaries earn a minimum wage, which means 1.16 million people, with a total cost of around 10.8 billion. As for the periodic economic benefits, according to the agency that runs this program, in 2021 it will cost 54 billion and 381 billion for a 4-year period. The nation's general budget provides resources for utility subsidies for 4 trillion pesos. However, it is key to remember that this is a cross-subsidy system where high-income dwellings finance the low ones. This means that actual spending on such subsidies is much higher. Finally, at the low level of replacement, we find the resources that the budget allocates for access to housing solutions, which amounts to 1.7 trillion, and the one allocated to the school feeding program is to 1.2 trillion. However, in both cases, it is important to consider that these programs leverage resources from local governments, so the final investment is much greater. When considering the resources of all these programs, the total amount spent on subsidies in 2021 will add approximately 28 trillion pesos, or $7 billion. To conclude the information on the table, let me resume the analysis on the earned income tax credit. To determine how much this mechanism costs, which would be the equivalent to the negative income tax type of UBI, I have turned to the data of the Great Integrated Household Survey, which is Colombia's living standards measurement study. This data represents 49 million Colombians, of which 20.7 million, 42%, report income, equivalent to 21.6 trillion per month. The most important estimation is to determine how many of these people would be eligible for the earned income tax credit. To do this, I assume that only those who get their income from a formal job contract, according to the survey, would be eligible. A total of 17.2 million turned out to be eligible, corresponding to an income of 11.7 trillion. Of this group, only 500,000 people reported a monthly income above 3.6 million, which is the threshold for the tax credit, making it the income upon which the 25% deduction and the 3.6 million exemption can be applied. This resulted in a total taxable income of 8.7 trillion. Therefore, if instead of being completely exempt, this amount was to be taxed at a rate equal to the withholding tax for the general services, which is 6%, it would mean a tax revenue of 500 billion. In short, this is the figure that is not collected monthly on account of the earned income tax credit. Therefore, the annual estimate will be 6.3 trillion. Thus, if we include the value of the earned income tax credit as part of Colombia's budget in subsidies, the baseline for the UBI will climb to 34.2 trillion. This is $8.6 billion. Now, following a methodology similar to that proposed by the World Bank in their last year's study on UBI, Estimating the impact of the transition requires the following steps. Selection of the subsidies to be considered, subtracting from the household income the amount corresponding to these subsidies, and simulating the new disposable income values with the addition of a UBI. I have opted for a broad definition of income, which involves all the items considered by the Great Integrated Survey. In total, the 15 million households had an income in the month prior to the survey equal to 41 trillion pesos. This means that, on average, each household has an income of 2.7 million pesos or $675. Following the logic of the replacement between the current programs and UBI, a 5-phase transition is proposed, which is partly sequential and partly parallel. This table presents the figures for such transition. First, in the budget column, I reproduce the values established for each program. Then I have set them in chronological order according to the suggested phases. The budget of each phase is cumulative, since each one builds on the previous one. This first phase has 5.8 trillion from solidarity income. The second one accounts for almost 11 trillion when all the cash transfer programs are added. In phase 3, there are 13.1 trillion as we consider the resources from the family subsidy system and the periodic economic benefits. For the fourth, a budget of 18.8 trillion would be reached by including subsidies from the housing and utilities. Finally, in the last phase, resources equivalent to 30.1 trillion would be achieved by including the mean benefit scheme and the earned income tax credit. Notice that I have left the mean benefit social security and the earned income tax credit for the fifth and last phase, due to the expected high level of political debate around them, which will require a mature UBI to face it. To carry out the analysis, I use the current amount of solidarity income as the basis for the new UBI, which means that each individual would receive 50,000 pesos per month or $12.50. That results from rounding up the 160,000 pesos per household divided by the average household size of 3.3. To make the respective simulations, I again use the Great Integrated Household Survey of December 2019. This new table summarizes the results of such simulations. To understand the information, let's start with the second column labeled LB, which shows the baseline of current situation without solidarity income. This means that there are 2.6 million beneficiaries of Families in Action, Youth in Action, or Elder Colombia, who comprises 2.3 million households. A total of 4.6 million families are below the poverty line, equivalent to 30.3%, and the Gini coefficient would be 0.51. The first column simulates a world without cash transfers, therefore with no beneficiaries. In this case, poverty would increase slightly with no change in inequality. In other words, the comparison between columns 1 and 2 shows the weakness of current social assistance in terms of its contribution to eradicating poverty and reducing inequality. The following columns show the evolution in households and people served, the changes in the number of poor, the poverty line, and the impact on inequality. In phase 5, it is possible to deliver a UBI to each Colombian and there would still be resources left over. So methodologically, it is proposed to do a second round of an additional 50,000 per person, starting from the poorest household until the budget runs out. At the end of the story, an exciting result is shown because it leaves evidence that with the same current resources but better distributed, we could go from a 4.6 million poor households, which represent 30% of the population, to only 3.3 million, which means 22% of poverty. Inequality would also improve from 0.51 to 0.45, a very significant leap. Of course, this final result does not mean that the road isn't rocky. For example, moving to phase 2, in which we redistributed resources from the current cash transfer programs, has the potential to worsen poverty conditions. This is because the same budget is being distributed among more people. That is why it is so important that phases 1 and 2 are simultaneous, so that a net positive effect can be appreciated. That is, as the beneficiaries of Families in Action, Youth in Action, and Elder Colombia are replaced, the UBI is consolidated. As a great conclusion of this exercise, I can say that if we achieve a comprehensive budgetary makeover of the Colombian social protection system, we can significantly impact poverty and inequality. However, this will highly depend on not turning our backs on means testing, which of course compromises the characteristic of universality with which UBI is traditionally defined. In addition, the dimension of these adjustments invite us to reflect on whether they can be achieved overnight or even during a single government term.
Okay, thank you, Armando.
Thank you.
So lastly, we've got Diego Rocha, and I'm going to play your presentation for you. Is that correct, Diego? Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, so back to YouTube. Okay, off we go.
I am Thiago Rocha, a PhD student in constitutional law at University of Oviedo, Spain, in co-supervision with the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. I'm also an associate member of the Brazil Basic Income Network, the Basic Income Network Spain, and the Associate for Unconditional Basic Income Portugal. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizing committee for this great event, as well as thank them for the opportunity to present part of my academic research for public debate. And today, we are here to talk about the judicialization of the right to basic income in Brazil, the case of the writ of injunction number 7300. The scope of this research does not lie in the analysis of the philosophical foundation of UBI, or even in the analysis of its economic feasibility or political convenience. What I bring to you is an analysis of a legal case, guided by the positive Brazilian legal system. For this, I must first make some brief considerations on specific aspects of the Brazilian legal system. Thus, I have divided this presentation into three basic parts, followed by the concluding remarks. In the first, I'll deal with the provision of the right to UBI in Brazilian positive law. In the second, I will outline the fundamental right to a writ of injunction. Only then, in the third, I'll deal specifically with the judgment of the writ of injunction number 7300. As the first part, the right to UBI in Brazilian positive law. According to Article 1 of Law 10,835 by the year of 2004, approved by consensus in the two legislative house after the tireless efforts of the then Senator Eduardo Suplicy. According to the Article 1 of this law, as from 2005, citizens' basic income shall be established, which shall be the right of all Brazilians residing in the country and foreigners residing in Brazil for at least 5 years, regardless of their socioeconomic condition, to receive annually a monetary benefit. The payment of the benefit shall be of equal value for all, and sufficient to meet the minimum expense of each person with food, education, and health. Consider for this the degree of development of the country and the budgetary possibilities. The payment of this benefit can be made in equal and monthly installments. Well, as we can see, in general terms, the right to CBI, to citizens' basic income, as stated by the referred law, has the 5 important characteristics of a UBI, of a universal basic income: regularity, incurrency, individual, universal, and unconditional. Well, at this point, our colleagues in the audience must be wondering, if there is a legal provision for the right to UBI in Brazil, why has it never been implemented? It's really a good question, in fact. But although the right to CBI was clearly established, even with an express deadline for implementation in 2005, the legal text allowed the executive branch to regulate certain aspects, such as the implementation stage, the value of the benefit, the allocation of amounts in the union's budget for 2005, and the other measures necessary for the implementation of the program. This is what you can see at the article, at the first paragraph of the Article 1 and the Articles 2, 3, and 4. So after more than 17 years of deliberate inertia by the executive branch in relation to this issue, the fact is that CBI had not been implemented as legally provided for. Not even a group of studies were set up by the executive branch to analyze the details of the implementation. So this is the general terms of the right to UBI in the Brazilian positive law. So you go to the second part of our presentation. What is in Brazil the fundamental right to a writ of injunction? What is that? Well, at this point, my fellow jurists must be asking themselves, but is there no legal instrument that can guarantee the implementation of this right, of the right to a UBI? And here is where I start talking about an interesting figure in the catalog of the fundamental rights in the Brazilian Constitution, the writ of injunction. According to the section 71 of the Article 5, this article is specific about the fundamental rights and guarantees. According to this section, a writ of injunction shall be granted whenever the absence of a regulatory provision disables the exercise of constitutional rights and liberties, as well as the prerogatives inherent to nationality, sovereignty, and citizenship. It's also important to point out that according to the Article 102 of the Constitution, it is the competence of the STF, the highest court of the Brazilian judiciary, to judge the writ of injunction when the question of omission is related to regulatory duty of the President of the Republic, and is just the case. It's also important to see that the Public Defender's Office has the competence to file the request about this regulation. And now, all these considerations have been made, we can get specifically into the analysis of the main aspects of the writ of injunction 7300 case. It was filed by the Public Defender's Office on behalf of a citizen who claimed not having the necessary resources to maintain a dignified existence. The public defender pointed out the omission of the federal executive branch in regulating the right to CBI provided by law for more than 17 years, and requested that the value of CBI be set at one minimum monthly salary until the benefit provided by the 2004 law is regulated. And what has decided the STF, the Supreme Court? According to the Supreme Court, by majority, partly granted the injunction in order to determine the President of the Republic that implement in the fiscal year following the conclusion of the trial of merit, that will be the next year, and the setting of the amount provided for Article 2 of Law 2835 to the stratum of the Brazilian population in a situation of socioeconomic vulnerability, and to adopt all applicable legal measures, including modification of the budgetary legislation of 2022. And it also decided to appeal to legislative and executive branch to adopt the necessary administrative and or legislative measures to update the values of the basic and variable benefits of the Bolsa Family program, that is a conditional cash transfer program in Brazil, separated or jointly, and also to improve the social cash transfer programs currently in force, especially Law 10,805, unifying them if possible. So it's very important. It's very interesting to see that this decision is very recent, is of this year, of April, and it is still have not been implemented. And you have to see what will happen at the next year, at the next month. What will the legislative and the executive branch do about that? But even with just this decision, we can see some interesting things that I point at my final remarks. So it's very important to consider that initial its decision, the STF refused to set the value to a CBI, leaving this task to the executive branch. So the judiciary does not put any specific value to UBI. Furthermore, it recognized that it is unconstitutional only the failure to regulate the CBI for the most vulnerable part of the population, and not for the entire group of beneficiaries listed in the Article 1 of Law 10,835. That is, technically, the Supreme Court determined the implementation of an unconditional income to the poorest population, and not an unconditional and an universal basic income, as would be a full citizen's basic income as provided by the referred law. So in the time that I have, this is my presentation. I thanks a lot all of you that gave me your attention, and you can make me some questions that you want at the end of the session, or even send me emails or other contact. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hi all, sorry, there's obviously some technical problems in the background that Timothy is dealing with. Who is next? Leandro?
I've actually finished.
Oh, good. Okay, sorry, I've been doing other things and listening in.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi,
everyone.
Timothy,
That's
sorry.
just my computer having a bit of a meltdown getting back into Zoom. It's all good now. Okay, so we've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. I'm just going to see if we've got any have been asked already over in the Q&A on Viva. But I don't know whether maybe to start off the Q&A, any of the presenters want to. Yeah, so we've not got any audience questions there. So yeah, maybe some of the presenters have things to say about each other's work, or actually, Barbara, would you like to?
Yeah, no,
I'm just going to stop the recording.